All right, so I'm sort of on a roll here with the Lord of the Rings. There's so much. That was written by a guy named J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a Christian. And in the Lord of the Rings, there is a minor evil named Gollum. And he has had the ring, and he's had the ring for a long time. And the ring eventually goes to Frodo, who is the Hobbit, young Hobbit. And Gollum keeps trying to get the ring back. And so the whole way through all these 3 long volumes, Gollum is a protagonist. He's an evil protagonist. And at one point in this scene, Frodo, who has the ring now, and he realizes that Gollum is following them, he says it's a pity that Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance. So, let's watch this and see how Tolkien has this play out. This is Gandalf right here. It's not Gollum. I like that scene so much is because of what Gandalf says, that the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many. The pity of Bilbo, who doesn't kill Gollum when he gets the ring. The pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many in this. And one of the reasons why Gandalf is a much beloved figure in the books and in the movies is because he's a combination of power and compassion, power and mercy. He's a combination of righteousness and purity, and he's a figure of compassion and mercy. And I think one of the reasons why it ends up that Gandalf is so popular is because our hearts long. Our hearts were built for something like that, for a hero like that. And Tolkien has just almost an endless flow of compassionate wisdom come out of Gandalf all the way through the books and all the way through the movies. And I think that's one of the reasons why our hearts are attracted to Christ. That's one of the reasons why people who don't even know Christ, when they read the Gospels, their hearts go out to that combination of power and purity and righteousness and wisdom and mercy. All of those things together are a part of what make Christ compelling to people. And so I want to look at this particular text today because I think there's something really important in here for, well, I think, of course, there's something important in here for all of us, but I want to look at one thing in particular as we go along. So, here we go. John 8, verses 1 through 12. The background here is that Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Feast of Booths, one of the three feasts that all of the Jews were supposed to come to Jerusalem for each year. And there was all kinds of celebration. It was kind of a harvest festival as well. And people slept outside in tents. It was called the Feast of Booths because they built these shelters out of palm fronds and all different kinds of leaves to remind them of living in the wilderness. And so it was kind of, when you take your family camping, how much fun it is. That's kind of the idea that was going on here. Kids love this festival. And so Jesus is there, and he's teaching every day in the temple. He comes into the temple, he teaches, and then he goes back out to Bethany and stays with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, his very good friends, at night, and then comes back into the city for the festival. And the story goes, Jesus, while he's teaching in the temple, so you have to get this in your mind. Imagine the temple, which is a huge structure and had lots and lots of people at it. And the biggest place where the most people hung out was the court, not of the Gentiles, which is where all the stuff went on that Jesus got mad at and threw the people out of, but the court of men and women. You went into a further closer to the temple, and only men could go there. Not even Jewish women could go there. That's going to become important here in a minute. But so just to know, it's in the largest court of the temple, the court of men and women, and Jesus is teaching there, and some Pharisees and scribes bring a woman caught in the act of adultery. Now you should be asking yourself, what? Caught in the act? How does that happen? Somebody must have gotten pretty careless. Or somebody was looking for an opportunity. But we'll talk about that more a little bit later. Just let it stick like a splinter in your mind right now that this woman was caught in the act of adultery. And the religious leaders bring her and set her in the midst. So she's in the middle of this big crowd of people. Jesus is teaching at the biggest court of the temple. And there's probably a big crowd. And they bring this woman and set her down right in the middle of everything. She's the focus of attention. She's the center of all that is going on in this story. And notice that they are trying to trap him. It says that they bring him down and they made her stand before the group. Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery, and the law of Moses were commanded to stone such a woman. What do you say? They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So it's, what was Admiral Akbar's line? It's a trap. Don't step in there, Jesus. It's a trap. They're trying to find an occasion to discredit Jesus. So, and it's true. When they brought the woman, they say in the law of Moses, in Deuteronomy 22:22, it says clearly that adultery is a capital offense. People that are caught in adultery should be stoned and killed. Now, we don't do that anymore, so that seems a little bit harsh to us, and it probably was, and part of the reason why we don't do it anymore probably has to do with the history of this text and who Jesus is. But leaving that aside, it says in Deuteronomy 22:22 that people caught in adultery should be stoned, should be killed. Both parties. There's that splinter again. It takes two to commit adultery, right? Where's the man? We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll get there. I just want you to keep that kind of in your mind. So, they're setting him a trap. Jesus is a popular young rabbi. He has a reputation for supporting and being with the common person. The common people love him because he's always, sort of sticking it to the Pharisees and his teaching and everything, telling stories about them that make them angry. And we've talked about that for a while now. That's kind of what led up to the crucifixion, is that he kept telling these stories and parables about them that made them look bad. But the common people were hearing him gladly. So, if he answers this question, and if he says, forgive her, which is what his reputation is, he's a merciful and kind person, then the Pharisees and religious leaders can say, he's soft on the law. Or have you heard that phrase before? He's soft on the law. He didn't uphold the law. But, on the other hand, if he says, okay, stone her, he loses not only the affection of the common people and loses his reputation as a person of mercy and compassion, but he also brings down the wrath of Rome upon them, because Rome, being the conquering power, were the only ones that were allowed to carry out executions and capital punishment. Conquering people do that. They reserve the most important rights for themselves. And what's more important than the right of life and death? So the Jews couldn't carry out executions, only the Romans could. So if Jesus says, forgive her, they can discredit him. He's not a person who follows the law. He's soft on the law. If he says stone her, then he brings down the wrath of Rome and he loses the affection of the common people. What is Jesus to do in this situation? What does he do? At first, please notice this. This is a helpful bit of wisdom for all of us when we're caught in desperate situations. At first, he does nothing. Let that just sit with you for a minute. At first, he does nothing. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is to do nothing and think and pray and perhaps, bend down and doodle in the dust. And some people have made all these, big theological points about doodling in the dust. I'm not sure that there's anything in particular that can be made about it, for sure, because there's nothing said about it right here in the text. Some people think that there's a text in Jeremiah that says that when God comes, he's going to write the sins of the people in the dust, and they will be blown away, the people and the dust. And so Jesus, maybe people say he's writing down, somebody's name and a sin after it. You, Ahmed, stealing. And Ahmed is in the crowd saying, oh my gosh, he knows me. He's right. Well, who knows? Who knows? The point is, and some people say he's distracting attention from the woman. He's trying to take the focus off of her because this is an embarrassing situation, don't you know? Who knows? In the first instance, he just kneels down and doodles in the dirt. He does nothing, apparently, at first. But they persist. They want to force him to make some sort of a statement. So then he comes out with his famous saying, let those who are without sin cast the first stone. And it says they all begin to go away, starting with the older ones, the elder ones, the ones who are wise enough to know that nobody is there who is without sin. And so he saves the woman, and eventually he's left there alone. Now this, I think, is the most fascinating part of the story. He's left alone with the woman, and he says, does no one condemn you? And she says, nobody here. No, nobody condemns me. And he says, neither do I condemn you. Go your way and sin no more. Now, I think that besides being a brilliant and compassionate piece of counseling to this woman, if you want to call it that, counseling, besides all of that, I think the important thing for us to see out of that is that we cannot let go of the fact that Jesus is a forgiving and loving and kind person, even in the face of the law being broken. He doesn't condemn the woman. He tells her not to do it anymore, so he's not soft on law and order, but he also forgives her. Imagine what it would be like. And this is not what it would be like. This is exactly what happened. The God who gave the law on Mount Sinai in thunder and lightning and fire and fear. Remember, the people are gathered around the mountain while Moses is getting the law, and the people are afraid. Don't go near the mountain, or God is going to hurt us. You know, it's a fearsome, awesome thing, because the law is a fearsome and awesome thing. The one who wrote on the stone tablets with his finger, as it says in Exodus, also says to the woman, "Neither do I condemn you." I don't know about you, but that makes me feel like, wow, that is good news, isn't it? That the God who does have the right to wipe us off the face of the earth if he wishes, won't do that. He won't condemn us. When he comes in the flesh, that's what he's eager to say. That's what he's eager to live. That's what he's eager to show to people. Neither do I condemn you. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't make moral judgments, of course. Every parent is called to make moral judgments with your kids. Sooner or later, you're going to have to say, no, not that. Yes, do this. It's not saying that we don't make moral judgments. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect to make and enforce moral judgments. But what it does mean is that in this revelation of who God is through Jesus Christ, that the important thing to know is that when faced with sin, he's willing to forgive. He's willing to, in fact, take that upon himself. This doesn't mean that Jesus is soft on sin. Somebody's going to have to pay for that sin. In God's economy, somebody has to pay for that. And it's Jesus. The fact that Jesus says, "Neither do I condemn you," means that eventually he's going to take the condemnation on himself on the cross that was deserved by her. He's going to be, as it says in 1 John, the atoning sacrifice for our sins. So the fact that he lets her go and tells her not to do it again doesn't picture softness on sin. He's not soft on law and order, as it were. But he is willing to take the blame and the punishment and be the atoning sacrifice for this woman and for each one of us. Now, by the way, I want to go back to that before we end here. I want to go back to that thing about the man. Where was the man? I bet that probably half of the people here are not overly surprised that there was no man there. Are we surprised that there was no man there? Half of you? Do you see what I'm saying? Half of you women, are you surprised? Oh my gosh, there's no man. No, because you know, and I know, just like they knew, that when you're in a situation where men have the power and in a sort of a patriarchal society, when men have power and lots of it, things get enforced differently, do they not? Have not we seen that recently in the news quite often? It happens a lot. And I can see your reactions. Men are like, what? And the women are like, yeah, of course. That's the way we are. That's part of the sin that we're involved in. This is a story not only of forgiveness, but it's a story about male privilege. In a patriarchal society where men have the power, the law is enforced differently. And we have to come to terms with that. People that are in power and who have lots of power, and the power can be wealth, the power can be political power, the power can be anything, but people who are in power eventually abuse that power over others. They just do. And we've seen that a lot. So it shouldn't be surprising that this is also a story about how powerful men can get away with stuff. Where was the man? You don't commit adultery by yourself, right? You don't do it by yourself. It takes two to tango, and yet there's no man there. So this is a story about that as well. And this makes for different dynamics. Women who have been wronged often will not come forward for numerous good reasons until the pressure gets to the point where they just can't hold it in anymore. And it's not because they're lying. It's not because there's politics involved. It's because this kind of thing happens a lot. And we still live in the same situation. And yet Jesus is still the same Jesus. Jesus is still the same Jesus who triumphs over the sin in our lives by taking it to the cross with him. One of my favorite verses in the whole Bible is in the book of James. That would be surprising to some of you. The book of James. Martin Luther didn't even want James in the Bible. He thought there was no gospel in it. But James 2:13 says, mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy triumphs over judgment. That enables me to sleep at night. I've told some of you before, I heard from a famous preacher on TV one time. He said, if you people knew what I struggled with and what I doubted over the week, you'd never come back here next Sunday. And that's probably true for many preachers. If you knew what I struggled with and what goes through my mind and heart as a pastor, as a man of God, mercy triumphs over judgment enables me to sleep at night. The fact that Jesus is willing to be the kind of person who takes a person's sin upon him, who takes the focus, the negative focus of public attention off of this poor woman who's been railroaded, dare I say, into a bad situation, and takes it all, puts the focus on him. It's a metaphor for how he is going to deal with our sin in our lives. He takes everything that's bad in us and takes it upon himself and takes it to the cross and takes it out of the way. And in our case, just like in this woman's case, mercy triumphs over judgment. It just does. So, when you come to the Lord's Supper, I can't end without saying this. In your Bibles, if you're looking in your Bibles, there's a big space in between there, right? Like the story of the woman, and that's partly because there's some textual issues. Textual issues about whether this should be right here in John, whether it was in the original manuscripts or whatever. Anyway, the point is you read this and you tend to say, oh, okay, that's the end of that story. New story down here. The next thing that Jesus says is, when he speaks to the people, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I think part of the reason why John put that story here and then has Jesus saying, I am the light of the world right after, is because part and parcel of what it means to be the light of the world is to be the kind of person, the kind of God for whom mercy triumphs over judgment. You want Christians, do you want to have an impact on the world? Do you want to show people what God is about? Then let mercy triumph over judgment in your life, in your relationships. Let the light of Christ so shine in you that you can't help but let mercy triumph over judgment. Because that's the kind of Lord that we serve. Let's close in a word of